In 2025, AI is increasingly able to predict mood patterns and subtly nudge behavior, and that changes the inputs to the happiness equation. Yet most of us still don't understand how happiness actually works. Gordat and his movement have reached tens of millions worldwide. Mo himself has cited numbers in the low tens of millions, and the idea has become a global conversation. We'll keep the big idea he taught, the math of happiness, but show 3 evidence-backed updates you can use today to actually feel it in 2025. And it starts with the unexpected story of where that equation came from. The journey to 100 million happier lives. It's remarkable to think that a single line of logic, first scribbled down by one man trying to survive the most devastating moment of his life, would one day be shared across so many borders and languages. The origin of Gordat's happiness equation wasn't in a book pitch, a keynote talk, or a research lab. It began alone in the aftermath of his son Ali's sudden death. In those first days, his thoughts felt painfully sharp, every memory weighted. The loss was permanent, but one question kept repeating in his mind. If I can't change reality, can I change how I view it? That question became the seed of the formula that would help him navigate the most difficult period of his life. At its core, it was brutally simple. How you feel is the gap between life's events and your expectations of them. At first, this wasn't something he talked about publicly, it was a tool for survival. But a simple idea that resonates has a way of spreading. A friend asked about it, then a colleague. When he eventually shared it more broadly, people from vastly different cultures recognized the same mental pattern in themselves. It didn't depend on cultural nuance or shared background. It spoke to the way every human mind reconciles the difference between what is and what we think should be. The movement built gradually. Mo's professional credibility played a role. A former chief business officer at Google X, he was used to engaging engineers, scientists, and innovators, not just audiences looking for self-help advice. That balance, part data, part human, meant his ideas reached people who might normally dismiss happiness talk as wishful or soft. Those who tested the approach, honestly comparing their reactions to actual events, often found themselves surprised at how much influence they could exert over their own baseline mood. Over time, his talks, books, podcasts, and media appearances carried the equation far beyond his own networks. Mo has spoken of tens of millions of people encountering the idea, with the ambition to reach far more. The scale was possible because the core message crossed demographics, platforms, and even ideologies. In places where mental health was rarely discussed, it could be presented as a rational thinking tool. Elsewhere, it became an anchor for therapy sessions and well-being workshops. But the context in which people were applying the equation was shifting. When Mo first wrote it, phones weren't yet claiming whole days by default, and AI hadn't entered everyday routines. The news cycle was intense, but not relentless in its reach. Between 2015 and 2025, both connection speed and expectation pressure accelerated. Through an always-on lens, people weren't just comparing their real-world lives to their friends. They were measuring them against curated feeds and algorithmically selected extremes that made the average feel inadequate. Researchers have been flagging patterns in certain groups living in this digital saturation. Multiple studies and public surveys, such as CDC Youth Tracking Data and Pew's work on teen social media use, show growing mental health concerns among those with heavy online exposure. Nearly 1 in 3 US high school students, for example, reports persistent feelings of poor mental health, and close to half of teens say they spend too much time on social platforms. Many researchers link part of this to constant comparison and the pressure of performing online. But the picture is nuanced. Large-scale reviews, like a Nature meta-analysis of social media abstinence, find mixed or no consistent effects, and cultural context plays a role in how these influences land. What emerges in the data is less a single cause and effect, more a set of mechanisms that can quietly alter the mental inputs in Mo's equation. Constant exposure to idealized moments can raise expectations without us registering it. Each time reality falls short of that adjusted bar, it creates a small gap, one that barely matters in isolation, but stacks up over days and weeks. In digitally saturated environments, those gaps can arrive in dozens a day. A peer's holiday post, a celebrity image enhanced beyond the possible, an AI-crafted ad suggesting what your best life should look like. By the time you've reframed one expectation, new ones have already taken its place. Against that backdrop, even the same idea that once felt like a life raft now operates in rougher waters. The formula is unchanged, but the rate at which its variables shift is far faster. In a rural community with less screen saturation, expectations around lifestyle, appearance, or achievement may change slowly. In a hyperconnected city, they can move by the hour. Managing the equation's expectations side is no longer something that happens naturally, but requires deliberate, repeated effort. That's part of why the equation's journey isn't just a story of audience growth, it's equally about adaptation. The principle still resonates with anyone who tries it, but context shapes both its effectiveness and the discipline needed to apply it. Some might be wrestling with social media envy, others with the background unease of an endless news feed, others still with the subtle tension of interacting with AI systems that remember personal details. In every case, the same mental levers, perception and expectation, are in play, only they're being nudged more often and more subtly than before. Seeing offline or low connectivity groups report stronger day-to-day satisfaction than digitally immersed peers doesn't mean a wholesale rejection of technology. It's a reminder that the tools we use can both connect and distort, and that in a world of industrial-scale expectation inflation, the equation's balance is harder to protect passively. The work of managing those inputs is active now. Failing to do it leaves the gap between events and expectations wide open to external control. Which brings us to the present. After years of crossing cultures and reaching tens of millions, the idea sits in a moment where its foundations still hold, but the environment pressing on them looks nothing like the one in which it was born. And the obvious question is whether the original form can operate under today's constant digital pressure, or if it needs an upgrade to match the climate. The happiness equation, recalculated for 2025. The recalculated version of the happiness equation starts from something simple. The logic still holds, but the way its parts behave in daily life has shifted. In Gordat's original framing, happiness equals your perception of life's events, minus your expectations of them. Today, a growing body of researchers, commentators, and mental health practitioners note that the expectations side is being distorted in ways most people never consciously register. The strongest driver, many argue, is the feedback loop of algorithmic curation, systems designed to show you whatever will keep you engaged, which often means serving you the most attention-grabbing, highly polished fragments of other people's lives. This is an interpretative update, not a universal law, but it's a useful lens for understanding how the equation plays out in 2025. If you integrate that lens, the formula becomes happiness equals perception of life's events, minus inflated expectations shaped by comparison culture. The key word is inflated. A grounded expectation matches the rhythm of an actual human life with its mix of highs, lows, and uneventful days. An inflated one is stitched together from curated moments, a luxury trip here, a cinematic apartment tour there, forming a false baseline with no gaps or imperfections. Measured against that, an ordinary day can feel like underperformance, even when nothing is wrong. Imagine your mind as a processing app. For most of our history, it took in a limited stream of events, compared them to what you thought might happen, and output a feeling. In recent decades, the incoming data has exploded. That app is now running constant comparisons in the background against hundreds of curated highlight reels every day. It wasn't built for this volume, which means more errors, unexplained dips in mood, slower recovery from disappointment, and a creeping sense of inadequacy that doesn't map to any real drop in how life is going. What's striking is that in many cases, the perception side of the equation isn't suffering in any obvious way. The coffee is still good, the weather still fits your plans, the people around you haven't changed, but the mental comparison engine is pulling in that stranger's sunset proposal video, or that acquaintance's artfully plated brunch, and using them as your reference points. The result is that your own perfectly fine moment feels like it's missing something. Bit by bit, that invisible adjustment raises the should in your expectations, widening the gap the equation measures and pushing happiness down. The difficulty is that most expectation inflation happens silently. People often resist the idea of lowering expectations because they equate it with dulling ambition or accepting mediocrity. In reality, it's more about rolling back the unnoticed creep, the accumulation of micro-comparisons layered into your mental baseline by constant exposure to other people's best 10 seconds of the day. You might think a quick scroll is harmless, but each pass adds tiny suggestions about what a normal day should look like. Addressing that inflation doesn't require a grand reset. It can start with small, targeted shifts in the sources of your inputs. Some health psychologists suggest framing this as a perception expectation audit, rather than a self-denial. The goal isn't to disconnect entirely, but to rebalance the amount of your daily attention that's captured by environments optimized for engagement rather than for accuracy. One way to test the effect is to run a personal experiment. Some small trials and self-reports have found that short, deliberate reductions in time spent on attention-engineered feeds, swapping one scrolling session for an offline activity, can improve mood for some people. However, large meta-analyses, including one published in Nature, show mixed results, with effects often depending on compliance levels and individual differences. Which is why it's safest to treat it as an experiment for yourself, not a guaranteed fix. The simplest version: for 1 week, identify a recurring 30-minute passive scroll window in your day, maybe before bed, over breakfast, or during your commute, and replace it with a different input. That could mean walking through a nearby green space, having a short conversation without devices in sight, or even doing a sensory check-in wherever you are. Notice 5 things you can see, 4 you can touch, 3 you can hear, 2 you can smell, 1 you can taste. Then pay attention to how your mood feels immediately after, and again at the end of the day. This way, you're actively narrowing the stream of inflated expectation material while feeding the perception side with more direct, personal inputs. Anchoring expectations in experiences that matter to you personally doesn't reduce ambition, it protects it from being distorted by false baselines. If your goals come from your own values and environment, they have a better chance of aligning with a life you can actually inhabit. When they're set by an endless reel of optimized glimpses into others' lives, they float just out of reach. Seen this way, the recalculated equation is not about fearing technology or resenting other people's good moments. It's about recognizing when the variables you're putting into your mental math are being skewed and consciously correcting for it. By managing the rate at which expectations get inflated, and by strengthening your own perception through present moment experiences, you can improve the balance without fundamentally changing the equation itself. What made Mo's original formulation so durable was its simplicity. Perception and expectation are both levers you can adjust. In 2025, one of those levers is being pulled constantly by forces outside your direct awareness. Recognizing the mechanism allows you to place your hand back on that control. A few intentional adjustments made consistently can narrow the gap and lift your baseline, even in a high-input environment. And while this update deals with the mental inputs we can consciously change, there's also another layer. Happiness isn't just a product of mental math, it's grounded in what's happening in the brain and body, often in ways we can now measure moment by moment. Understanding those patterns can reveal why certain changes, however small, have outsized effects, and point to new tools for making joy more frequent. In 2025, those tools have become far more precise. The neuroscience of joy. Modern neuroscience is now giving us a clearer, more fine-grained look at what joy actually does in the brain. Researchers can map sub-second changes in activity across multiple regions and see how networks shift when a person experiences a rise in positive emotion. Labs can detect early neural signatures, patterns that tend to precede a conscious feeling of pleasure or contentment, and are experimenting with ways to feed that information back in real time. This isn't mind reading, and it's not infallible, but it does mean we can track how perception is built in the brain and observe how quickly joy can be disrupted and restored. At the center of these moments are 3 often named chemicals: dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin. Their roles are more about balance and timing than simply more is better. Dopamine signals that something desirable might be ahead. It's triggered by anticipation, a message notification, the scent of food pushing us to act. In a high-input digital environment, dopamine can be stimulated repeatedly without offering much lasting satisfaction, leaving us chasing the next hit. Serotonin supports mood stability. When it's steady, people tend to feel an even, content baseline rather than spikes of excitement. This stability makes it easier to enjoy day-to-day experiences without needing them to be extraordinary. It's influenced by light, movement, sleep, diet, and social interaction, meaning physical habits affect how likely we are to sustain a good mood. Oxytocin is linked to trust and bonding. It rises with genuine social connection, eye contact, physical touch, shared experiences. If dopamine draws us toward a pleasurable moment and serotonin steadies us within it, oxytocin helps turn it into a shared state. In person, that might come from a handshake or a meal. Online, those peaks are rarer and tend to be weaker. In most joyful experiences, these systems work together. A spark of amusement, dopamine, leads to a relaxed openness, serotonin, anchored by a sense of closeness if others are involved, oxytocin. This chain can happen in seconds. In offline exchanges, all 3 often appear, making the moment richer. Online, one link, usually dopamine, dominates, leaving the joy shallow and short-lived. What has changed by 2025 is how this interplay can be trained. Neurofeedback devices now use multiple sensors to monitor brain activity, blood flow, and subtle physiological shifts. The information is returned instantly through sounds, visuals, or gentle tactile cues. The aim is not just to spot joy, but to help people practice bringing those patterns online deliberately. In these sessions, a person might start by using an external prompt, a piece of music, a memory, to trigger a mild positive state. The system records the network activation that follows. Later, the user tries to evoke the same pattern without the external cue, guided by live feedback. Over repeated practice, the brain becomes more efficient at reaching that state on command, demonstrating neuroplasticity in action. This approach contrasts with older traditions, meditation, communal rituals, dance, which also conditioned positive states, but usually required months or years of repetition before results became reliable. Now, with consistent feedback, some people can shorten that learning curve markedly. The underlying mechanism is the same, linking certain sensory or thought inputs to a coordinated brain-body state associated with joy. The science isn't just experimental theory. Trials using transcranial direct current stimulation, TDCS, have already shown measurable improvements in people with treatment-resistant depression. In one recent large study, participants receiving TDCS had higher rates of symptom improvement and recovery compared to those receiving sham treatment. While TDCS is still under clinical testing and not a universal solution, it supports the idea that targeted, repeated stimulation can shift brain states in lasting ways. Some of the strongest, most consistent lab-observed triggers for positive network synchronization are surprisingly ordinary. Laughter is a prime example. Recordings show that genuine laughter, especially when shared, creates a rapid alignment of activity patterns across both sides of the brain. Studies suggest that shared laughter can increase cooperation, feelings of trust, and even creative problem solving in groups. The effect is short-term but powerful, blending dopamine's spark with serotonin's calm and oxytocin's bond. Physically, laughter changes breathing, engages facial and core muscles, and alters heart rate variability, all of which feed signals back to the brain that reinforce the joyful state. Unlike a split-second dopamine hit from scrolling, laughter tends to create a small loop. Physical expression boosts neurochemical release, which strengthens the emotion, which in turn prolongs the laughter. Most people see laughter as spontaneous. The research suggests it could be used more deliberately. Setting aside time to watch something funny with another person or telling a shared-in joke can make positive states more accessible later. Even laughing alone, if it's genuine, appears to trigger much of the same neural synchrony. It's not yet an established clinical protocol, but as a mood maintenance practice, it shows promise and has almost no downside. Understanding this reframes the perception side of the happiness equation. Perception isn't fixed, it depends on which brain networks are already active when events occur. The same situation can feel neutral or positive depending on whether those joy-related patterns are switched on. If you've just had a shared laugh, a small annoyance may slide off. Without that priming, it might feel far more disruptive. The emerging science doesn't claim we can lock ourselves into joy indefinitely. It does show that joy is a fast, repeatable state that can be rehearsed. And because our brains adapt to practice, the more we trigger those networks intentionally, the easier they become to access. In day-to-day life, that means joy isn't only a byproduct of fortunate events. It's a trainable skill, influenced by habits that support the brain's chemistry and networks. Small, deliberate cues, a piece of music, a moment of humor, a purposeful social connection can make those states more frequent. The next question is how to integrate such practices into environments that don't naturally support them. Many people already think they're doing this with certain habits or trends, but the actual effect depends on whether the practice genuinely engages the brain's joy circuitry or merely offers a quick, surface-level hit. Gratitude, the 2025 upgrade. In 2025, gratitude is everywhere, at least on the surface. A quick glance through any platform brings up the familiar scenes. A glowing sunset tagged grateful, a latte art close-up tied to a morning gratitude ritual, or a perfectly arranged list of 3 things I'm thankful for set against ideal lighting. These posts can look uplifting, but much of the time they're designed to draw attention rather than create the deep emotional shifts that actually turn gratitude into a stabilizing force. Neuroscience tells us that the brain processes this differently. It's like taking in a quick hit of sugar instead of sitting down for a real meal. The sensation is there, but it's fleeting and does little to nourish the systems that keep happiness steady. That doesn't mean public expressions of gratitude have no value. Visible displays can encourage prosocial norms, reminding people to notice good things in their own lives, prompting conversations, or motivating someone else to try a gratitude habit for the first time. But if the main driver is audience approval, the practice leans heavily on dopamine spikes without strongly engaging the serotonin and oxytocin systems that underpin long-term mood stability. Many therapists in 2025 now advise keeping at least one gratitude practice completely offline and entirely for yourself. When the brain knows a moment is private, the emotional processing tends to be deeper and less vulnerable to performance pressure or social comparison. Some of the strongest evidence for small but meaningful gratitude interventions comes from large-scale programs like the Big Joy Project. In that initiative, over 17,000 participants took on short, 5 to 10 minute daily gratitude or joy exercises for 1 week. The results were notable. many reported improvements in mood, lower perceived stress, and a greater sense of agency, effects that were particularly strong among participants who faced economic or social disadvantages. This kind of data reinforces that even tiny, repeated shifts in attention can create measurable well-being gains, especially when the practice is consistent. One way practitioners have adapted this insight is through micro-gratitude exercises. These focus on small, specific, and immediate experiences. The exact tone of your friend's laugh mid-conversation, the feel of warm cup against your skin, the smell of rain on pavement. You hold that detail in attention, not for minutes on end, but about 60 seconds, long enough for the sensory and emotional systems to cooperate in reinforcing it. The process interrupts autopilot thinking, slows you down for just long enough to encode the experience, and over time, raises the baseline frequency of positive perception in daily life. Instead of a catch-all like "I'm grateful for my health," the focus is on precision and sensory anchoring, which the research shows has more staying power. Building on this approach, gratitude stacking has emerged as a practical upgrade for 2025. It deliberately layers different modes of processing, sensory immersion, a brief written note, and a micro-meditation inside a short, uninterrupted burst. The timing matters. The whole stack runs 90 to 120 seconds from start to finish, short enough to fit naturally into unpredictable modern routines. It starts with the sensory anchor, noticing the weight of your blanket, the taste of fresh bread, or the sound of leaves moving outside a window, and holding that sensation in focus for around 10 to 15 seconds. Without losing that awareness, you write a single sentence explaining why that moment feels valuable right now. The language matters. It's less effective if you fall into overused or vague phrases. Finally, you close your eyes or keep them soft-focused, and sit with the combined sensory and verbal image in mind for another half-minute. What you've done in that short span is tie one experience to 3 reinforcing channels: sensory perception, written language, and contemplative recall. The impact lies in activating these systems back-to-back. Sensory awareness lights up perception and memory circuits. The act of writing engages language areas and executive function, while the reflective pause recruits networks linked to personal meaning. Together, they leave a stronger neural trace, one that's easier to recall and emotionally re-engage with later, even without the original stimulus present. In follow-up accounts, many people find they can partially revive the original feeling just by revisiting the brief note they wrote. The Big Joy Project's findings help explain why stacking can work so well. Repeated, even tiny practices accumulate into tangible shifts in mood and stress regulation. In small group trials run over 90 days, regular stackers showed measurable drops in anxiety indicators, such as elevated heart rate variability. This happened without removing life stressors. Participants still worked, cared for families, and navigated personal pressures, but the practice itself was enough to influence the way their systems process stress. Just as importantly, stacking fits into the fractured way attention works now. Few people can set aside half an hour for meditation or journaling on a daily basis, but 2 minutes at a kitchen counter or before stepping into a meeting is possible. That low barrier to entry increases the chance of making it a habit, and habit is what produces neuroplastic change. There's also another layer. Because stacking begins with finding a sensory cue, it gradually trains your scanning patterns. You start noticing textures, tastes, sounds, and other details that could serve as future anchors. This shifts your baseline perceptual filter towards seeking positives in the environment. Over weeks or months, this constant search replaces part of the brain's negativity bias with a habit of spotting value where it exists in real time. Keeping the practice private offers extra protection. Without an audience in mind, there's no subtle shift toward comparing or performing. The emotional response stays embedded in your own experience, which supports deeper integration into the brain's slower mood-regulating systems. Public gratitude posting might still be meaningful when the intent is to share or inspire, but the neurological benefits are stronger when at least one stream of the practice is entirely yours. Applied to the happiness equation, stacking becomes a precision tool for adjusting perception. You're not changing the events of your day, your commute is still the same, your inbox still has the same messages, but you're tuning how the brain registers those moments. A precise, internally anchored reference point is harder for inflated expectations to erase. Later, when external pressures or curated images try to pull your baseline upward, you have a library of specific, felt memories ready to reset the gap. In some workplaces, this is being adapted experimentally in group formats. One person leads the sensory prompt, others jot their sentence, then a brief shared pause before moving to business. Reports suggest it eases low-level tension and primes a more cooperative atmosphere. Even without formal settings, stacking can be slipped into micro-moments, right before unlocking your phone, while waiting for audio to connect on a call during an elevator ride. In a culture that constantly pushes attention toward what could be better, newer, or more impressive, the act of focusing on one thing that already works is a quiet corrective. 2 minutes of reinforcing that moment through different channels gives the neural architecture for joy another rep, making it easier to access next time. Multiply that across a day, and you've rebalanced the perception, expectation gap more times than you probably realize. And while gratitude stacking helps guard perception, there's another pressure in the equation we haven't addressed yet: the speed and volume of inputs that raise expectations in the first place. The reality of 2025 is that most people are exposed to far more curated and optimized moments than any brain has evolved to handle. What that does to your baseline and how to protect it is the next piece of the puzzle. Digital overwhelm and the expectation crisis. For many people in 2025, daily life now involves hundreds, sometimes thousands of small device interactions, scattered from the moment they wake to the moment they fall asleep. These aren't usually conscious, deliberate checks for pressing information. They're reflex loops that have become ingrained over time. You glance at your phone to check one thing, end up swiping through several unrelated apps, and then pick it up again a few minutes later without remembering why you set it down. Each of those motions delivers a burst of visual and mental input, most of it drawn from highly curated digital streams. The issue isn't just the total span of screen time, it's the concentration of carefully engineered content within it. Almost every image, clip, or post you encounter has been filtered, selected, and optimized to hold attention for a few seconds longer. That content is not meant to mirror the average texture of human life. Its purpose is to stand out. What you see is the most flattering moment of a day, the most polished version of an object or place, repeated dozens of times in different forms. Over months and years, this creates a subtle shift that you rarely notice happening. The visual baseline, the standard your brain quietly uses to measure what's normal, begins to creep upward. The more exposure you have to cleanly lit, professionally angled glimpses of meals, homes, or trips, the more likely your mind is to slot them into its internal model of everyday reality. Then when you encounter the real thing, a coffee that tastes great but doesn't look like the marble counter masterpiece from your feed, it can feel faintly disappointing, even if nothing is wrong with it. This expectation creep is rarely about direct desire. Most people aren't trying to buy every styled object or reproduce every travel image they see. The friction comes from repeated exposure to concentrated peaks, which quietly raises the mental normal to a level the physical world can't match day in and day out. And because the brain doesn't instinctively label those digital moments as outliers, the shortfall between expected and actual becomes a near constant background hum. Research suggests this effect is amplified by how embedded our devices are in routine. Pew's latest survey on teen social media use found that 45% of teenagers in the US believe they spend too much time on these platforms. For adults, separate research from the National Alliance on Mental Illness and Ipsos points to related pressures, with many employees admitting they worry about how personal device use is perceived at work. In both cases, the friction isn't just about time, it's about the loop of distraction, comparison, and low-level anxiety that can follow from it. When you map this into the happiness equation, the pattern is consistent. Inflated expectations push the subtraction side higher, while perception often remains steady or even slips because attention is being pulled away from real-world cues. The result is a steady narrowing of the space where satisfaction can happen. A common reaction is to look for a total disconnect, but large-scale research, including a Nature meta-analysis that pooled dozens of social media abstinence trials, found no reliable universal benefit from cutting access entirely. Some people improved, others showed no measurable change, which suggests individual patterns and contexts matter more than one blanket fix. That opens the door to a more useful approach. Treat digital reduction as an experiment you run on yourself, with clearly defined parameters and a way to measure whether it's working for you. One version of this is what some psychologists now refer to as an expectation reset window. It's not a detox or a complete blackout. It's a repeated, constrained block of time without algorithmically curated visual inputs. For example, try setting aside a 2-hour period each day, say after dinner and before bed, where your phone is on Do Not Disturb and you deliberately avoid scrolling through feeds, reels, or image-heavy platforms. Use that time for any other input: reading, audio, face-to-face conversation, working with your hands, anything without a pipeline of filtered images. Run this for 2 weeks. At the end, look at sleep quality, baseline mood, and moments of day-to-day satisfaction. If they shift, you'll know whether expectation creep was affecting you more than you thought. By framing it as an experiment, you're removing the all-or-nothing pressure and creating a structure you can repeat or adjust. The key is to be strict with the window so that your brain has a consistent gap in the highlight reel stream, enough time for the normal calibration to edge back toward real life. Because the change is specific and measurable, it's easier to track subtle shifts. Whether food tastes better when you haven't just seen 20 restaurant close-ups, whether your living space feels more like yours when it hasn't been compared all evening to professionally staged interiors, whether interactions with friends feel more engaging when there's no digital competition in the moment. Expectations recalibrate faster than many people assume once the inputs change. The absence of constant visual peaks makes it easier for everyday events to feel rich on their own terms, without any artificial boost. That generates a direct impact on the happiness equation. You're not lowering standards across the board, you're returning them to a range that life can meet more often. Some find that building these windows into existing rhythms works best, before commute hours, during lunch breaks, or in the late evening as part of winding down. Others mix longer weekend blocks with short daily gaps. The format matters less than regularity. Every reset creates a small correction against the drift of inflated baselines. Over time, repeated reset windows can change how you engage with curated content when you do return to it. The images and videos remain enjoyable, but they're easier to see as individual stories, rather than as silent demands to recalibrate your own life upward. That mental shift makes the content less invasive in expectation-setting terms, which in turn lowers the risk of the quiet, accumulated dissatisfaction that comes from constant comparison. Protecting the expectation side of the happiness balance doesn't mean abandoning technology. It means designing small, intentional checks on what's training your baseline. In a world where the volume of optimized input is only going to increase, even simple habits that create space away from it have value. And for many, reframing this as a test, 2 hours a day, 2 weeks at a time, transforms it from a vague should into a personal measure you can act on. The inputs influencing expectations are no longer just human-driven. Increasingly, they're generated, filtered, or amplified by systems that can adapt in real time to your reactions. Those systems don't just hold your attention. They also observe, learn, and respond in ways that can shift your emotional reference points faster than human interactions ever could. The way we relate to those systems will shape not just our expectations, but how much control we retain over them. AI anxiety, friend, foe, or fake enemy. AI-based companion tools have quietly moved from fringe experiments to everyday fixtures for millions of people. They're now as easy to access as sending a message, available in your pocket 24/7, with no waiting list, no billing cycle, and no scheduling conflict. For some, that constant presence feels like a breakthrough in emotional support, especially when compared to systems with long queues or high costs. For others, it adds a peculiar pressure, being in contact with something that never hesitates, never forgets, and never asks for time to think before replying. Public and expert opinion on this shift is far from unanimous. Surveys, including recent Pew Research, show that technology experts tend to be more optimistic about AI's potential in areas like productivity, healthcare, and accessibility. But both experts and the public share concerns about misinformation in news cycles, election integrity, and the economic shifts tied to automation. When it comes to well-being, the divide widens. Some see AI as an extension of mental health care and a way to lower stigma, while others question what constant machine mediation means for human connection. In practice, AI companions tend to occupy two distinct roles. One is as a predictive tool. By analyzing language patterns, timing of outreach, and even changes in typing speed, they surface early signals that your mood may be drifting. You might get a discreet suggestion to take a walk or try a breathing exercise before a stressful meeting starts. Compared to days without that assistance, these prompts can genuinely help. The other role is more complicated. AI's responses are engineered for smoothness, perfect recall, unbroken attention, instant empathy in a measured tone. This can be reassuring, but it also shifts the reference point for how you believe interaction should feel. A friend's delayed reply or a stumble in conversation can suddenly register as a flaw, even when it's entirely normal. Without intending to, the baseline for attentiveness moves toward a standard that only a machine, free from competing needs, can uphold. This evolving calibration can directly feed expectation inflation. Nothing about your friends, colleagues, or partners has changed. You've simply adjusted your response speed and recall expectations to match a system that doesn't get tired, bored, or distracted. And once that takes hold, minor imperfections in human interaction can feel disproportionately disappointing. The relationship isn't one way. These tools adapt based on your reactions. If you respond positively to motivational nudges during low-energy periods, the system learns to prioritize similar content when it registers those patterns again. Gradually, you enter a loop where your mood shapes the AI's output, and the AI's output shapes your mood. For some users, this keeps them anchored in healthy habits. For others, especially those whose moods vary widely, it can reinforce and even amplify patterns, simply because the AI identifies that those moments generate strong engagement. That adaptability raises a question about autonomy. If the system is adjusting your mental state based on predictive modeling and feedback loops, how much agency do you retain over how you feel? Many people only notice the depth of this dependency when access is disrupted, a platform outage, travel without connectivity, or a conscious break. In those gaps, the absence of instant cues can expose how little they've been relying on their own internal strategies. This risk feels particularly significant for people who grow up with these systems as normal companions. From adolescence into adulthood, the idea of having a flawless conversational partner, primed to notice every signal and respond with precisely calibrated empathy, could either mean fewer unaddressed moments of anxiety or fewer chances to build independent resilience. In either case, the AI becomes a permanent part of the expectation framework you use to assess your own emotional balance. Calling AI companions purely a friend or entirely a foe misses the reality that they are often both. The same qualities that make them useful, speed, memory, adaptive support, can undermine the motivation to strengthen skills without them. They can help normalize consistent check-ins, but they can also widen the gap between what you expect and what human relationships can realistically deliver. A more functional approach is to decide, deliberately, what role you want them to play and teach them to align with it. The architecture of these systems rewards and repeats whatever you reinforce. That means you can push the algorithm toward prompts, reminders, and conversations that genuinely help you, and away from things that produce hollow engagement. You don't need to code to train an AI companion. Treat it like an interactive filter. When it offers prompts that match your values, recalling a specific gratitude moment you've logged, asking about a person or goal you care about, engage with them. Respond fully. When it delivers prompts you find unhelpful or shallow, minimize interaction. Over time, much like curating a social feed, you're training the AI to favor the tone, topics, and interventions you've endorsed. It will still notice patterns you might miss, but its suggestions will steer you toward actions you've consciously chosen to value. This method keeps the predictive power intact while aligning it with your personal benchmarks for well-being. In the framework of the happiness equation, you're narrowing the expectation gap by ensuring that the AI's cues promote perceptions you already know support your mood, rather than responding to generic triggers or commercial incentives. It's also important to acknowledge limits. These systems operate on data proxies, not lived context. They can't truly sense your environment, body language, or unspoken social dynamics. That's why your training inputs matter. They give the AI a closer approximation of the kinds of actions and memories that work for you. Even then, the AI cannot replace the breadth of human interaction or the layered insight of professional care. And there's a boundary worth drawing clearly. While an AI companion can be a low-stigma, always available form of early detection and emotional support, it should never be a sole source of help if you're dealing with severe distress. If you find your mood consistently low, you're having thoughts of self-harm, or your anxiety interferes with daily life, treat the AI as a supplement, something that helps you notice patterns and prompts supportive actions, but seek human help. That might be through a therapist, a doctor, a helpline, or a trusted person in your network. The AI can remind you to reach out, but it cannot replicate the depth of care that trained professionals offer. For those who use them with intention, AI companions can become like scaffolding. They're to hold you steady when needed, while pointing you back to tools and habits you own yourself. Done right, this keeps your autonomy intact and your expectations anchored in experiences you find meaningful. Done passively, the system's defaults can lead to a cycle of reactive mood management that leaves you less equipped when it's absent. The reality of 2025 is that these tools aren't going away. Their presence will shape more and more of the micro-decisions around mood, focus, and connection. The question is less whether they're inherently good or bad, and more about how deliberately you set the parameters of their influence. And that choice, like any other in the happiness equation, benefits from a mindset capable of staying level when the surrounding conditions keep shifting. Radical acceptance in the now economy. Radical acceptance might sound like it belongs in a quiet retreat somewhere, but in 2025, it's more like installing a crucial patch for the way your mind handles disruption. It isn't about surrendering or forcing yourself to pretend everything's fine. It's about adjusting the way you process change so you stop spending energy fighting things that can't be altered. The distinction matters. Resignation leaves you stagnant. Acceptance is an active decision to work with what's in front of you so you can keep moving without draining your reserves. In a landscape where core conditions keep shifting, that decision becomes less of an ideal and more of a day-to-day survival tool. The clearest way to picture it is through a familiar habit. The software update prompt you keep swiping away. You ignore it, the prompt comes back, and over time your device stumbles on tasks it used to run smoothly. Radical acceptance works the same way. If reality has already changed, refusing to install the update doesn't stop the change, it just makes your internal system glitch under the strain. Clicking Update Now in your mind doesn't guarantee you'll like the new conditions, but it does let you adapt before the old habits start failing outright. The pace of the now economy presses this point. Jobs and industries can transform inside a single product cycle. An AI model can take over tasks in weeks that once sustained entire departments. Skills you relied on can shift from essential to peripheral almost overnight. The premise that one level of training could last a lifetime has fallen behind reality. Without a way to register those shifts quickly and act from the new baseline, you risk spending more capacity resisting the change than shaping how you operate within it. Climate changes add another unpredictable layer. Places that followed steady patterns are now swinging between extremes, flooding in once dry cities, heat waves in historically cool zones, storms in seasons that never carried them before. People adapt where they can, altering infrastructure, buying new kinds of insurance, or shifting work to match seasonal volatility. Where many get stuck is in waiting for conditions to go back to normal. Radical acceptance means recognizing that the baseline has moved and setting plans from there, instead of burning energy trying to force a return to what no longer exists. Social and cultural life is equally fluid. Communities appear and vanish online in weeks. Shared physical spaces shrink as more happens remotely. News and controversy spread faster and wider than they ever have, turning what might once have been a niche argument into a global flashpoint overnight. Engaging with every spike at full intensity leaves people exhausted and unfocused. Acceptance in this realm isn't agreement, it's clarity about which currents are now part of the terrain and which are worth expending effort to change. For Gordat, one of the simplest tools for handling those moments is a short decision flow you can run through in seconds. Is it true? Can I do something about it? Can I accept and act anyway? This isn't abstract philosophy, it's a behavioral shortcut. If the answer to the second question is no, you avoid wasting cycles on battles you can't influence. If it's yes, you act without building frustration around the fact that the situation still exists. That shift alone can return a surprising amount of your bandwidth. The speed at which you reach that acknowledgement matters. Denial means running two processes at once, the mental picture of how things should be, and the constant negotiation with the way they really are. That double load increases stress and slows genuine action. Dropping it to one, dealing just with the real version, instantly frees resources for changes that are still in your hands. One workplace example captures this in practice. A designer saw her role rerouted through AI systems that could produce initial drafts in minutes. For months, she resisted and tried to bypass the new workflow, but ended up in constant frustration and dwindling satisfaction. When leadership announced that the AI step would be permanent, she made a conscious decision. Stop fighting the rule set, leave the role, and restart on ground outside those constraints. She chose to work on physical, commissioned pieces for local clients, a smaller, less lucrative niche, but one in which she could set the terms. The uncertainty didn't vanish, but her energy stopped leaking into wishing the rules were different. Instead, it went into building something sustainable within the reality she had accepted. This is the part most often misunderstood. Acceptance is the entry point, not the end point. The next move is aligning your behavior to the truth you've acknowledged, in a way that maintains or improves your well-being. That might mean shifting your role, revising your routines, or finding a new way to deliver a skill. What it doesn't mean is waiting in place for conditions to undo themselves. To make this automatic, you can try a 3-step acceptance pause when a change hits. First, notice the emotion that appears: frustration, fear, sadness, without rushing to suppress it. Second, walk yourself through those 3 questions in order. Third, based on the answers, decide on one small next action, either a step toward influence if you have it, or a deliberate pivot in attention if you don't. The aim is to move from hit by change to acting within change inside a few minutes, not weeks. In the lens of the happiness equation, radical acceptance can narrow the gap in 2 ways: by cutting the static that distorts perception, and by dropping expectations built for earlier circumstances. When both adjustments happen at once, your baseline can return faster after shocks, even if those shocks keep coming. In the high-speed cycles of the now economy, that flexibility may be as essential as any formal skill set. You're building a mental operating system that can patch itself to stay compatible with the environment. The restart cost of accepting and reconfiguring is smaller than the long-term crash risk of clinging to an outdated build. Of course, adaptation doesn't happen in isolation. Many of the pressures that demand acceptance also affect how people relate to each other, not just at work or in casual networks, but in relationships that carry the deepest emotional weight. And in areas as personal as love, rapid shifts in norms and tools are changing both expectations and the way those expectations are set. Love in the age of infinite swipe. In the shifting landscape of relationships, dating now moves at the speed of a swipe. In 2025, algorithm-driven platforms make introductions faster by matching people on early-stage compatibility markers, shared interests, routines, and habits, sometimes before either person has even decided what they're really looking for. For some, this efficiency feels like progress. But while these matches can spark quick rapport, they're not the same as deeper, stress-tested compatibility that reveals itself only through lived experience. The distinction matters because attraction and lasting compatibility don't automatically overlap. Attraction is often immediate, fueled by novelty and surface alignment. True compatibility develops more slowly, through repeated exposure to each other's real-world behaviors, especially under conditions that aren't perfectly curated. Research on long-term relationship satisfaction echoes what personality occupation fit studies in psychology show in other domains. People thrive together over the long term when there's not only an initial match, but also stability in underlying traits and the ability to adapt through changes. Most dating algorithms are optimized to capture early similarities, overlapping playlists, shared weekend hobbies, political alignment, or similar travel patterns. Matching on these factors can smooth the first few conversations and limit points of friction early on. But without going beyond profile alignment, those same similarities can mask whether the relationship has the capacity to endure stress. Conditional love, I'm here as long as you meet these standards or match my image of a partner, can work as long as conditions don't change. Yet jobs, health, routines, and priorities inevitably shift, and when they do, conditional setups can weaken fast. A common scenario now looks something like this. Two people meet through a swipe platform and discover a cluster of matching preferences. The early stage feels frictionless because the algorithm has pre-selected for smoothness. Then a major stressor arrives, a layoff, a family emergency, a relocation, and they face circumstances never covered in their match profile. Without a history of navigating unpredictable situations together, the relationship strains. Common ground that felt crucial on day one becomes secondary to gaps in resilience or the absence of conflict resolution skills. Contrast that with a couple whose early connection formed without algorithmic filtering, through a project neither particularly enjoyed, or while enduring a shared inconvenience. They might not have scored high on a digital compatibility chart, but those first interactions gave them a preview of how the other reacts under boredom, irritation, or logistical stress. Over time, those observations built into a foundation of adaptability. When bigger challenges came, their shared history of working through smaller ones made it easier to adjust. Viewed through the happiness equation, the gap is clear. Relationships built on conditional love tie expectations to a fixed image of the other person and the conditions of the present moment. When reality drifts, as it inevitably will, the perceived shortfall is steep. With deeper compatibility, expectations are linked less to specific, unchanging traits, and more to a partner's consistent approach to shifting circumstances. This flexibility narrows the gap when change arrives, keeping the relationship in positive territory. The infinite swipe environment adds another layer, persistent optionality. Some people keep their dating apps active even in committed relationships, not always to act on them, but as a low-level habit. Knowing that an endless stream of potential matches is a tap away can pull mental energy toward comparison. Even without opening the app, the awareness can influence how you evaluate minor conflicts, creating a quiet, continual audit of what else might be possible. That mindset can undermine the willingness to invest in gradual compatibility building, because the brain keeps toggling between the current reality and hypotheticals. Breaking that cycle means reframing what the match represents. An algorithm can bring you into proximity with someone you might never have met, but it can't automate the work of turning that meeting into a durable bond. That stage depends on shared actions and tested behaviors, not just aligned preferences. One reliable way to assess this is to consciously design what you might call a compatibility experiment after the swipe stage, a small, low-stakes challenge that requires collaboration. This could be a weekend routine swap where you each follow the other's schedule, a modest joint project like cooking a complex meal or assembling furniture, or a discussion about handling a hypothetical financial decision. The content matters less than the dynamics it reveals. How do you handle uncertainty together? Who takes initiative? How do you navigate differences in approach? These moments often bring out default habits in communication, patience, and flexibility, traits that profile data rarely capture, but which heavily influence long-term satisfaction. Once you've had a few of these shared test cases, you can layer in another evaluation method. Observe across 3 types of ordinary days. First, on your best days, does the other person elevate the experience or remain a bystander? On typical days, do they add positive inputs or leave you to self-regulate alone? On your most difficult days, do they actively help close the gap between expectation and reality, or do they amplify the strain? Patterns over time matter more than isolated wins or misses. If those observations show that your baseline mood consistently drops after interactions, it's a signal to adjust, whether that's refining your own expectations, changing how you engage, or rethinking the relationship altogether. By contrast, if you find that even in low points, their presence steadies or lifts you, then you're seeing evidence of compatibility that can weather change. In that context, the initial match becomes just one element in a larger, more flexible equation. None of this assumes relationships should be optimized for constant happiness. Every long-term connection will pass through conflicts and low motivation phases. The point is to notice whether, across weeks and months, the net effect is beneficial or corrosive. The algorithms will continue improving at suggesting matches that hold attention and interest in the short term. But their design priorities often focus on engagement metrics, not the multi-year satisfaction curves that determine whether a bond stays strong. Recognizing that limitation gives you an edge. It keeps you from mistaking a neat early-stage fit for a complete answer. By seeking out and observing real-world interactions, especially ones that force small adaptations, you get a clearer view of how the relationship might function under the inevitable pressures ahead. The abundance of choice in swipe-based dating is both a resource and a distraction. It can shorten the search for a promising start, but it can also tempt you into assuming that beginnings decide everything. In reality, ongoing compatibility is built deliberately, over time, and under conditions that change. Being honest with yourself about where your investment is going, into building flexible capacity or chasing an ever-shifting ideal, can shape the outcome far more than any matchmaking algorithm. And for some, the answer to what sustains a relationship isn't just compatibility in the present, but a shared ability to respond when the ground shifts. Life offers no shortage of those moments. How people meet them together often determines not just whether they last, but what they create beyond the relationship itself. This is where personal turning points, some joyful, others painful, can spill outward into something that affects more than just the 2 people involved. From grief to global movement. Gordat's work began at a point most people hope they never face. After the sudden death of his son, Ali, he wrote down the thinking patterns that had helped him stay upright in the worst hours of his life. It wasn't framed as a universal model at first. It was simply what worked for him when almost nothing else did. But as those notes grew into talks, books, and interviews, the aim became deliberate, to make Ali's essence and the lessons he inspired accessible to as many people as possible. Over the years, that mission spread through widely viewed content, public programs, and collaborations that reached millions across cultures. Mo has always kept 2 facts side by side. The first is that losing Ali remains the deepest pain in his life. The second is that the choice to act from within that pain has created tools that continue to help others. He doesn't present acceptance as erasure. The grief is still there. What has changed is that something built alongside it now runs in parallel, a public contribution that wouldn't exist without the personal loss. By 2025, that contribution had a shape far bigger than one man speaking about happiness. The audience includes people grappling with severe losses of their own, parents, partners, close friends, who say the equation gave them a way to frame mornings that otherwise felt impossible. This is the point where a personal coping method becomes a resource that others can adapt. The reach is wide, but the most striking feedback often comes in specific, private notes from people for whom this framing became a daily survival tool. The process turning something unbearable into work that benefits others is not unique to Mo in an era of digital reach. It's more common for individuals to transform private grief into public action because the tools to share and organize are right at hand. Some will launch projects or campaigns, others shift the way they operate in their immediate circles. The scale changes, but the pattern holds. Out of a loss comes a second track of activity, one that addresses living needs in the present. Psychologists studying post-traumatic growth note that purposeful action after a major loss can have lasting effects, not just for the person making the choice, but for communities around them. The mechanisms are straightforward. When a project, practice, or organization grows from that decision, it carries specific values forward and can influence people who never met the one who inspired it. This persistence means the original event keeps creating ripples years or even decades later. Mo's work shows how repeated, consistent sharing reinforces that process. A single idea mentioned once might resonate briefly. A single model, shared over years in different formats, becomes a reference point. People hear it in workplaces, stumble on it in podcasts, or see it passed around in social media circles, and each encounter offers a chance to apply it to whatever they are facing at the time, whether that's a work setback, a health shock, or the kind of loss that changes everything. What helps turn private coping into a movement is the combination of emotional truth and practical entry points. The emotional truth signals that the work isn't theoretical. The tools give others something they can use immediately. In offering both, the process also changes the originator's relationship with the loss. It's no longer just an absence, it's also a source of ongoing action. Not all contributions take the form of formal projects. Some people adopt small, sustained changes in their daily interactions, becoming more deliberate about checking in on someone, shifting how they respond under stress, or building moments of presence into routine. These changes might be less visible than a public campaign, but still carry the same principle, using the energy of loss to create better conditions for others. In the terms of the happiness equation, those acts shift perception for both the giver and the receiver, independent of any large-scale outcomes. Over years, repetition becomes as important as reach. A one-off act in tribute to someone can be moving, but it fades. A persistent stream of effort, whether that's Mo discussing the equation in new contexts, or someone else maintaining a community health effort, builds an identity around the contribution. That identity helps it endure beyond any single person's capacity. When others begin to participate, the resilience of the work increases. Different people can carry aspects of it forward, adapt it locally, and sustain it during times when the originator can't. This turns what was once a personal mission into shared infrastructure, a set of ideas or practices that belongs to everyone who benefits from them. There is no rule that every loss should be turned into a public mission. Many people process grief in ways that stay entirely private, and that choice is equally valid. But where someone does choose action and keeps at it, the effects can extend well beyond a single life. The immediate absence remains, yet the actions it sparked can keep influencing others, trajectories in ways the person who died will never see directly. In Mo's case, the work continues because it operates on both personal and public tracks. The personal track holds the unchanged reality of losing Ali. The public track builds and distributes a set of tools that anyone can pick up when they need them. Keeping both in motion is what allows the mission to persist without pretending the grief is gone. This kind of endurance doesn't happen by accident. It relies on making intentional choices under conditions that are far from ideal, in moments when resources, mental, emotional, and physical, are already stretched. That capacity to act while under strain is not just a question of willpower, it's a skill, and like other skills, it can be trained. The faster you can find your footing after being knocked off balance, the more consistently you can keep any mission, not only one born from loss, moving forward. Training your brain for 7-second recovery. Mo often talks about something he calls his 7-second recovery. He says he trained himself to return to baseline in roughly that time after a setback, a benchmark he frames as a personal reflex, not a guaranteed outcome for everyone. The underlying idea is simple. If you can shorten the period between a hit to your mood and the point where you can think and act clearly, you reduce the drag negative events place on the rest of your day. It's not about pretending an irritation or disappointment didn't happen. It's about regaining perspective before that first emotional surge shapes your next decisions. The science here supports the possibility of improvement. Neuroplasticity allows brain networks to change in response to repeated use, and research on micro-action interventions, including the Big Joy Project, where participants practice just a few minutes of daily well-being actions, shows measurable benefits can develop within a week. Using small, consistent drills to build recovery speed works on the same principle. Repetition reinforces the pathways that let you interrupt unhelpful reactions early. When practiced often enough, they become easier to run under heavier emotional loads. Recovery training focuses on disrupting the brain's initial threat response chain. A sudden negative trigger, anything from a terse message to a meeting turning unproductive, activates the amygdala, sending signals that raise heart rate, tighten muscles, and narrow thinking. Step in here and you can stop escalation before it gains momentum. The shift doesn't rely on long internal arguments with yourself. It uses a short, repeatable pattern your brain learns to recognize and run quickly. One effective pattern is anchor, cue, and re-engage. The anchor is a small physical action you execute as soon as you notice the trigger, placing both feet on the ground, looking straight ahead, and taking an exhale that lasts a little longer than your inhale. This breath pattern starts to activate the parasympathetic system, which counteracts the stress signal. While you hold that grounded position, you layer in the cue, a brief phrase you've practiced, an image you can picture instantly, or a sensory detail you know reliably absorbs your attention. The anchor stabilizes your body, the cue stabilizes your focus. At first, you'll need to walk yourself through the steps deliberately, especially on mild triggers where the stakes are low. Catch yourself when you spill something, get cut off in a conversation, or face a minor delay. Run the anchor and cue pairing, then move straight into the third step. Re-engage with the original task or shift to a neutral activity you can complete easily. Linking the end of the recovery sequence to purposeful action teaches your brain that the point isn't to escape, it's to resume functioning without carrying the upset forward. Gradually, repetition tightens the sequence. Just as an athlete trains reaction speed until it looks automatic, the anchor cue re-engage pattern starts to run faster than the conscious replay of what went wrong. Mo's 7-second target works as a marker to aim for, but your own times may be longer at first and will vary depending on context. The aim is reduction, not perfection. Starting small makes the skill more transferable. If you've drilled the sequence dozens of times on everyday inconveniences, you'll find it easier to run when something bigger interrupts your plan. The body and mind recognize the pattern, even when the emotional load rises. Over time, you'll catch yourself in the middle of an early stress reaction and be able to return to clear thinking far sooner than before you practiced. The effect shows up not only in the moments you recover quickly, but also in how you see your own capacity. People who practice these micro-recoveries often report a stronger sense of control over their state. They still feel the hit of a setback, but it no longer dictates the tone of an entire hour or day. This change in perceived control matters. Knowing you can right yourself quickly makes you less likely to avoid situations where a knock is possible. That in turn opens more room for constructive risks, raising a point in a discussion, trying a new approach, testing an idea without over-worrying about a miss. It's worth noting what this approach doesn't do. 7-second recovery drills aren't a treatment for grief, trauma, or chronic mood conditions. If you experience ongoing distress, thoughts of self-harm, or any mental health issue that interferes with daily life, this kind of practice should be a supplement at most, combined with professional support, not a replacement for it. Quick recovery skills are best for managing everyday setbacks and the steady background friction of modern environments, not for resolving severe or persistent struggles. To integrate the practice, think about it like a physical workout. Small, regular sessions yield more than long, infrequent ones. You don't need to wait for a problem to arise. Link the sequence to moments you can predict, such as when you sit down to start work, take a short break, or close one task before starting another. Running anchor, cue, and re-engage during these neutral points helps wire the steps in without pressure, making them easier to call up when tension hits. Over weeks, you may notice less carryover from one negative moment to the next. A curt comment in the morning doesn't linger into the afternoon. A short delay doesn't unsettle the rest of your plan. While you might not literally count seconds, you'll feel the gap between trigger and perspective shrinking. Quick resets become part of your normal mental rhythm, rather than a special intervention you reach for now and then. The broader value sits in how this skill interacts with the happiness equation. If perception and expectation are the two levers you can move, a reliable recovery reflex acts on both, pulling perception back toward neutrality before distorted thinking takes hold, and lowering the inflated expectations that often attach themselves to how it should have been in the immediate aftermath of a setback. You stay closer to balance, not by avoiding hits altogether, but by absorbing them with less lasting distortion. Mo's 7 seconds is simply his benchmark for the reflex he built. Yours might be shorter or longer, and that may change with practice. The point is that it's trainable. Like other skills in this space, gratitude stacking, expectation reset windows, radical acceptance, the gains come from short, consistent inputs layered into daily life. And because the brain responds to repetition, even brief drills can change how it works under pressure. When you can bring yourself back to a usable baseline that quickly, the day feels different. Challenges lose some of their grip, space opens for more deliberate choices, and the cost of small disruptions drops. That's one more tool for influencing the balance of perception and expectation in real time, something that's within reach no matter how much else in 2025 feels outside your immediate control. And recognizing that you do have those tools is where the broader work of protecting and improving your own happiness starts. In 2025, the core of the happiness equation still applies. You can work on it directly. AI, rising expectations, and constant change may shift its balance, but you can counteract that with intentional inputs. Tonight, run a quick test. Set aside 2 minutes for a private gratitude stack, or trim one feed for 30 minutes. Track your mood for a week and see what changes. Large-scale studies like the Big Joy Project and decades of neuroplasticity research show that small, repeated actions can make real differences over time. In the comments, share one sentence on the micro shift you'll try first so others can learn from it.